We stood in the desert, where the earth was still smoking. We heard the crackling of stones scorched by the explosion. We breathed in the smell of ozone and dust that cut our throats. A black cloud hung in the sky. It was like a giant wound torn from the silence. We saw the sun breaking through it with a faded light. We were not happy. We were silent. We knew that the world would never be the same. And here was the question he could not dismiss. Can one man be responsible for millions? Can one mind, one discovery, change the entire balance of good and evil? Are we all just cogs in the great machine of history? He stood there too, thin, hunched over with tension. His fingers clutched a cigarette. But he wasn't smoking. His eyes stared into the fire, but saw something else. His lips moved slightly, as if he were whispering a prayer. We felt a cold that had nothing to do with the wind. It was the cold of awareness. We saw a new God being born, and we ourselves created him. And I thought then, whose voice will he speak with? Will he become a defender? Or an executioner? Or maybe he will remain just an echo of my name. But it all started not here at all. It started in a cramped room that smelled of dust and ink. There stood a boy who didn't know how to laugh like others. His world was in books. Thick and heavy, he touched them with his fingers as if to a shrine. The pages rustled, and this sound was music to him. His father sold paintings. His mother played the piano. It was always quiet in the house. Even when music was playing, silence was his first friend. It was me, a stranger among my own. I felt that people's words were less than my thoughts. I saw the world not in colors, but in formulas, and this was my curse even before I realized it. At school, he was strange. He spoke in sentences that no one understood. He drew formulas in the margins of his notebooks, like others draw trees. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He thought. The children laughed at him, but he didn't hear them. Their voices were too faint next to the noise of his mind. He saw the world in equations, like others see in colors. I didn't know then that knowledge also has a smell. It smells of burnt metal, wet stone, so it doesn't smell of peace. I'll find out about it later, when it's too late. When he first heard about Cambridge, he lay awake at night. His heart beat like a lover's. He imagined libraries filled with old books. He imagined classrooms where they talked about space and atoms. And here he was, on another continent. The rain was pounding on the stone of the old streets. The air smelled of coal and damp wood. In the laboratories, the machines hummed like living beings. He inhaled the smell, and it intoxicated him more than wine. He met those whose names would go down in history. Their voices sounded like thunder to a young boy. They argued, laughed, broke old laws. He caught every word as if it were gold. He sat in coffee shops where the smell of smoke and strong coffee, and they talked about the universe, about the future, about the invisible. He was one of them, although he didn't believe in it yet. I laughed with them, but even then I heard the bells ringing in my head, reminding me, knowledge is not a gift. It is a weapon, and it will find its way. But even then, among books and discoveries, a shadow haunted him. He wrote formulas, and in his head there were blows. They struck quietly, but persistently, as if someone was reminding him, this knowledge will not be pure. This knowledge will have a price. He chased away these thoughts, laughed at them. He believed in science, as others believe in God. Now I know. I was wrong. God is silent, and science always answers. We remember him as a skinny student back then. In his pockets, only crumpled notes. In his head, galaxies exploding with light. In his heart, a naive belief that knowledge makes the world a better place. We believed then too. We didn't know then either. This was Oppenheimer's story, the story of the death and birth of a new world. We continue to move deeper into history, and the further we go, the more we feel how difficult it is to separate the excitement of discovery from the burden of its consequences. America in the early 40s lived in a state of fear and expectation. The world was burning, and it seemed that science had become the last weapon that could save or destroy humanity. At this moment he appears, Robert Oppenheimer, a man who knew how to combine theory and charisma, a genius who could see equations as music, but at the same time remain vulnerable, emotional, with doubts that sharpened him from within. He was not the cold scientist who only calculates formulas on a blackboard, but rather a poet of physics, a man who believed in the beauty of nature and the harmony of its laws. And it was this belief that made him the most dangerous to himself, for where others saw only abstract symbols, he saw the real world, and when this world exploded in the desert, he understood. The formulas had come to life, and become a catastrophe. It all started with a sense of race, and this race was not a sporting one. It smelled of blood and death at every turn. Hitler was already chasing the same secret, and America could not allow Germany to make the first atomic strike. Here, in the depths of the American desert, a project began that was destined to change history. And Oppenheimer became its heart. He gathered the strongest minds on the planet, turned Los Alamos into a ghost town, where scientists, engineers, and soldiers lived in isolation, not even having the right to tell their families what they were working on. And despite this strict atmosphere of secrecy, there was fire there, because everyone knew. We were doing something big, something that no one in history had dared to do before. But doubts burned along with it. In the middle of the night, when the desert was plunged into a cold silence, Oppenheimer sat by the window, smoking a cigarette and thinking, did he have the right to lead this army of scientists where man had never set foot before? He often recalled lines from the Indian Bhagavad Gita, because there, in the ancient text, he found words that explained his own struggle. I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. And although these words had not yet been spoken aloud, they already lived in him, like a premonition. Meanwhile, Los Alamos was growing. It was a paradoxical reality. Children ran around the streets, wives cooked dinner, and nearby in the laboratories the fate of humanity was being decided. Scientists argued day and night, their boards covered with equations that led to one moment, an explosion. And everyone knew that this was not just physics, this was a new era. Oppenheimer, who had always been a brilliant speaker, had become a leader who was listened to even by those who usually did not recognize authority. He knew how to create an atmosphere where the smartest people in the world forgot about their egos and worked together. But behind this strength always hid his vulnerability, his fear that perhaps they were opening doors that would be better left closed. And then came the day when the theory was to become reality. The test bomb, Trinity, the New Mexico desert, dawn, the heart of the world held its breath. Scientists, soldiers, Oppenheimer himself. Everyone stood in anticipation, and this silence was heavier than any explosions. When the blow sounded, the sky split, the earth trembled, and a fiery mushroom rose upwards, as if nature itself was screaming. At that moment, a new era was born. Oppenheimer, pressing his hand to his lips, felt that everything would never be the same again. The same phrase echoed in his head. I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. This was not a victory. This was a sentence. The problem was that the story didn't end there, in the desert. It had only just begun. What had seemed like a test quickly became a weapon. And those weapons fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world saw for the first time how a single idea could translate into hundreds of thousands of deaths. And for Oppenheimer, that moment was a turning point. He could no longer see his work as a triumph of science. He saw only the shadows of men disappearing in the fire, and he felt that his own genius was now tied to tragedy. Then he became different. If before he was the leader of scientists, now he became a prophet of conscience. He began to talk about danger, about morality, about the fact that the world is not ready for such power. But the government does not like those who question their own victories. And so the state, which yesterday called him a hero, now began to turn away. Oppenheimer found himself under the gun. He was accused of having connections with communists. He began to be humiliated at hearings. He was isolated from what he himself had created. The man who gave the world the nuclear age now sat alone, destroyed and brokenly proud, and only in the depths of his eyes burned the same spark, the realization that he had done something that no one could undo. Oppenheimer's story is not just a story about science or war. It's a story about a man who was strong enough to change the world, but not strong enough to accept the consequences. And it's this pain, this inner tragedy that makes him not just a hero or a criminal, but above all a human being. We often imagine a genius as someone who walks confidently, without fear or doubt. But the truth is completely different. In the case of Oppenheimer, everything looked different. He was both brilliant and fragile, confident and broken. He lived in contradictions that cannot be explained in words alone. What made him move forward, even when it seemed that the whole world was pulling him back? And wasn't it in these contradictions that the greatest strength was born? After Cambridge in California, after those early years of pain and trying to prove to himself that he could, Oppenheimer began to enter the circle of people who were changing science. In America, he became more than just a scientist. He began to build his own school of physics. His lectures at Berkeley turned into a real show. Students said that when he went to the blackboard, the world around him seemed to freeze. He wrote equations with such passion that people felt. These were not just symbols. This was music. But therein lay the mystery. Why did he draw people so deeply into his orbit? And why did almost everyone who met him feel that there was some secret hidden in him? It was then that the first shadows began to appear. His interest in politics, his sympathy for the ideas of social justice, his contacts with people who would later be called communists. He was not a member of the party, but he attended meetings, donated money, supported movements. For some, this was just a tribute to the fashion of the time. For him, it was something more, a search for meaning. He felt that science without morality was empty. But did he realize that this very aspect of his life would one day become a weapon against him? His personal life was not easy either. He fell in love quickly and dangerously. His affair with Jean Tatlock, a bright and tragic woman, became one of those knots that will forever remain in his fate. She was intelligent, passionate, and at the same time extremely vulnerable. Oppenheimer loved her, but at the same time he could not stay with her forever. Their relationship was like an open flame, beautiful, but dangerous. And it is in this story that the mystery lies, which we have not yet solved, because what happened to Jean later haunted him for the rest of his life. During this period, he met Kitty, the woman he eventually married. She was different, strong, independent, with a difficult fate behind her. With her, he created a family, but even in this happiness there was always a crack. Why? Having everything, science, fame, family, could he never find true peace? The answer lies in the inner struggle that was becoming increasingly apparent. He believed in the beauty of science, but he saw that the world was approaching catastrophe. Fascism was gaining strength in Europe, Hitler was already moving forward, and physicists fleeing Germany brought with them news of terrible discoveries. Nuclear physics was no longer just a game of the mind. It was becoming the key to power over the world. And it was then that the idea was born that would change his life forever. But before we get to that point, it's worth pausing and asking ourselves, why him? Why not someone else? What was it about Oppenheimer that made him the face of a project that defined the course of the 20th century? The answer is hidden for now, and we will reveal it only later. Let's go back to those years. Oppenheimer begins to feel that his life is bifurcating. On the one hand, he is at the center of the academic world, building a department, educating a generation of physicists. On the other, something dark is growing in him, a feeling that he has a task ahead of him that goes beyond ordinary human existence. He begins to quote the Bhagavad Gita, speaks in words about fate and destiny. Was he not already doomed to a role that could not be rejected? It is here that we encounter the first great mystery. Did he really consciously set out to lead the creation of the atomic bomb? Or was he drawn into it by circumstances? History often says that man makes a choice. But sometimes it seems that the choice makes the man. And yet, he doesn't know how close he is to that limit. He lives, works, lectures, loves, argues, supports friends. But a shadow slowly and invisibly gathers over all this. The shadow of the project that will be called Manhattan. The shadow of the bomb that will become a symbol of power and curse. And here is the question we will leave open for you until the end. Was Oppenheimer a creator or a victim? Did he control his fate, or did fate control him? We will give the answer, but not yet. Because to understand this answer, we must walk the path with him, to the very desert of New Mexico, where the world saw a flame it had never seen before. Can we imagine the silence of a room where a few people decide the fate of the world? Can we feel the chill when a scientific idea becomes a weapon capable of wiping cities off the face of the earth? We stand next to Oppenheimer in those days when everything was still just a plan, when he understood that he was creating more than just science. He was building something more than an equation. But was he a creator or a hostage? He asked himself the same questions. When he worked at Los Alamos, when he saw young scientists writing formulas, laughing, arguing, he knew that it was no longer just a laboratory. It was a temple of science that was turning into a factory of death. But could he stop then? Could he give up when the fear of Germany, of Hitler, of his possible atomic bomb weighed on everyone? Oppenheimer was not naive. He understood that even if the war ended, the bomb would not disappear. Would it not become the shadow that would always hang over humanity? He saw how politicians came and went, how the military pressed, demanded speed, results. And he remained silent. Why? Fear? Duty? Or perhaps the ambition to remain in history? When he spoke to young physicists, he would ask them questions, but often the answers remained with him. Do you know what we are doing? He would ask. And they would answer, we are building the end of war. But in his heart, something else was ringing. Are we not building the beginning of the end of the world? In those years, he was tormented by dreams. In them, he saw an explosion brighter than the sun. He saw a desert turning to glass. And always, silence after the impact. Was it a scientist's dream or a prophet's premonition? Did he himself understand that the future would no longer escape his hands? And here was the question he could not dismiss. Can one man be responsible for millions? Can one mind, one discovery, change the entire balance of good and evil? Are we all just cogs in the great machine of history? He had no answer, but he knew that moment was coming. The day when the desert would become the stage for the greatest experiment in history. And then we would all know whether this was a triumph of science or the beginning of a fear that would never go away. Do you want me to continue and gradually answer these questions in the next part? In the story of Trinity itself, we stood in the desert, the sun barely rising above the horizon. The air was dry, slightly smelling of gunpowder and dust. Do we know what it feels like to hold the fate of the world in our hands? We didn't know then, but we felt it with him. He looked at the bomb lying in front of us on the sandy surface and was silent. Why didn't he speak? Why were his eyes full of anxiety and his lips trembling slightly? We asked him in our minds. Does he know the consequences? Does he realize that with one move he can change history? He looked at the desert, at the horizon, and it seemed to us that he was saying to himself, I know, and I am afraid. And at the same time, I understand that there is no way back. His fear was different, not physical, but spiritual, internal, cold, like a wind blowing at the back. And then the signal sounded. The explosion began. We saw the blinding light and felt the impact that pierced the ground. Is it possible to put into words what it feels like when formulas come to life and become the reality of death? He himself felt shock, triumph, and horror all at once. It was the moment when all questions were answered. Yes, he was the creator, but at the same time a hostage. His genius gave life to the bomb, and at the same time it consumed his soul. We saw him whisper to himself, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. Not as pride, but as a confession. For he knew, now everything would change. The world would change, and he would never be the same. We understood. The mystery of his life was in the balance between knowledge and responsibility, between the love of science and the horror of what it could create. But why him? Why not someone else? The answer is both simple and terrifying. He was brave enough to enter this field, smart enough to understand, and alone enough to bear the burden. The world did not choose him by chance. He chose his own path. And even when politics betrayed him, even when hearings and humiliations haunted him after the war, he could not abandon what he had already created. And we ask ourselves, can a man be forgiven for giving the world knowledge but using it as a weapon? The answer comes with the understanding that Oppenheimer's life is a lesson in human nature. We are always searching, always creating, and often unaware of the consequences. His tragedy is not that he made the bomb, but that he saw its true power before anyone else did. We saw him then, on a lonely hill after the explosion, smoking a cigarette, looking at the smoke and being silent. His face reflected an inner storm. We asked, what did he feel? He answered himself and us. Fear, responsibility, guilt, and the understanding that knowledge is an unstoppable force. And at the same time, he saw hope, science that can help humanity if used wisely. His life after that was full of struggle. He became the voice of reason and conscience, despite the fact that the authorities and politicians turned away. Listening, humiliation, isolation, all this did not break his spirit. Because he realized the main lesson. It is not knowledge that defines a person, but how he uses it. And even if mistakes are irreparable, we can draw conclusions for future generations. And here is the answer to all the questions we have been asking since the beginning. Was he the creator or the hostage? Both at the same time. Why did he lead the project? because only those who understand power can withstand it. Can a person be forgiven for their discovery? Yes, if we understand that true appreciation comes with an understanding of context and time. And most importantly, is there hope? Yes, because even amidst destruction, even after the most terrible mistakes, a person is able to learn, grow, and find the path to wisdom. We remember him as a complex, contradictory man who changed the world and himself at the same time. His story is a reminder to us all. The power of knowledge is a gift and a curse, a responsibility and a challenge. And if we can realize this, we will learn to choose light even in the darkest of times.